for those of you that watch The Honeymooners, this is Tito Rodriguez and the Claves for Mambo as Carlos Sanchez taught the women how to do the mambo, and Ralph was unhappy because he could not have a hot dinner because Alice was doing this. But it makes me think to Channel 11 in the days of watching the Yankees growing up when games were on free television. You hear that, folks, free television, but I don't think we'll see those days again. But it makes me think also of Marty Appel, who spent a large part of his career with the Yankees and with Channel 11 in New York. Marty has a resume that actually it would take the entire segment to fill. An author, spent years in the Yankee front office with people whom we've only read about. He also spent a large amount of time in the commissioner's office, and Marty is the consummate baseball historian, and he has written a number of books, one of my favorites being Pinstripe Empire. And if you are a Yankee historian, or if you just want to read about just baseball history in general, even if you're not a Yankee fan, even if you're a Red Sox fan, this book will tell you some incredible things about how this great empire got started. And some of the beginnings were somewhat, shall we say, perhaps non-spectacular. And the Yankees had actually started at the turn of the century, the last century, with a team known as the New York Highlanders. But I do understand that we have Marty, and it is certainly a pleasure to have him. And Marty, it's Tony DeAngelo in New Haven, and it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, and thanks so much for being on with us.
Oh, it's great to be on with you in Yankee country there.
Well, you know, and I guess Connecticut, you know, is it's red state, blue state, and it's always been that way. And and if you can indulge me here for a moment, and I realize there's some commonality in our background. I was watching a video of you over the week where you had mentioned, which I would like you to tell our audience about, of how you got started in the New York Yankees. But around that time, I was about maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, and I started to become a Yankee fan. And being a Yankee fan at that time, at least I was thinking about this last night, actually standing in the shower, was sort of like coming to the party after everyone left. You know, the tradition was there, but all the fun people had gone home for the evening. So, I actually went back and I looked this up. I had attended 3 games that year at the courtesy of my father. April 26, 1968, it's a 5-0 win with the New York Yankees, and Mickey Mantle hits his 521st home run to tie Ted Williams off of Earl Wilson. And I thought, wow, this is great. This is the return of Mickey Mantle. Well, maybe not. July 20th, 68, I'm there on bat day. The Yanks are shut out, but Mickey Mantle actually breaks up Luis Tiant's no-hitter, beating out a bunt, if you can believe this, or limping out a bunt. August 10th, 1968, the Pièce de Resistance, Old Timers Day at Yankee Stadium. The Yankees lose, but Mickey Mantle hits 2 home runs, probably 2 of the cheapest home runs you're ever going to see. The one that almost won the game was hit in the old left field bleachers. If Cesar Tovar was 3 inches taller, he probably would have caught it just right over the 298. So all of a sudden I had decided, and I said, you know, I am really the secret to the Yankees' success. So that night I wrote a big long letter to President Lee MacPhail, and I said, you know, Mr. MacPhail, if you were to give me season tickets, Mickey will start to recover in 1969 and the team will do well. And Marty, I don't have the letter, but he wrote me back a very thoughtful 2.5, 3-page letter saying, very professionally done. Gentlemen, thank you for being a Yankee fan, Tony. I understand what you're saying, but actually there's more to life than baseball, and we're trying to build a new team, and Mickey won't be with us for that much longer, but do follow us. We're going to do good things. But the thing that caught me, he said, I will not award you tickets on what you deem to be mere speculation, but here's a couple of passes for 1969. And man, I wish I had that letter. And you know, when you talked about, and actually I think this is probably a good part of the interview, how did you get started with the New York Yankees as a very young man, right around that same time?
It was at that same time. It was actually the summer of 1967. I was in college in central New York State. I had been a Yankee fan since I was a little boy, and I was editor of my college newspaper, and I just got in my mind, I'm going to write a letter to Bob Fischel, the PR director of the Yankees, and ask about a summer job. And that's exactly what I did. I didn't define the job. I just asked for a summer job. To my great surprise, because I didn't even expect an answer, I got a letter inviting me in for an interview. And what had happened was that Pete Sheehy, the clubhouse man, had rolled into Bob Fischel's office cartons and cartons of unanswered fan mail. And Fischel knew that this wasn't good. This mail needed to be dealt with. Otherwise, you got all these potential Mets fans. So he said he had received my letter just that very day, and he said, let's bring this kid in for an interview. And I got hired to answer Mickey Mantle's fan mail. Now, I didn't have any connections. My uncle didn't work in the ticket office. It was nothing like that. But what I did come to realize was that in the late 60s, young people in college were not really paying attention to baseball very much. And so he wasn't getting 100 letters a day from people like me looking for jobs. Mine was the only one. The attention of the nation's college students was elsewhere. I was one of the few still following baseball avidly, and that was how it all began. So my whole career, including talking to you this morning, goes back to that letter I wrote to Bob Fischel in 1967.
It's a fascinating thing, and it's really a time lost to history, I would say, that Yankee period. Maybe perhaps happily so, but then again, it was a time when I became a fan, the late 60s, early 70s, because my greatest memories were seeing Mantle come up in the third spot. Of course, he wasn't Mickey. He could still swing the bat. He could still, he was a threat, even though his legs were betraying him. But my second biggest memory probably is seeing, Mr. Burke, Mike Burke, walk around the park in his very natty sport coat with a very jazzy tie and waving to the fans and giving the peace sign. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I guess it was this whole thing of we've got to get people interested in coming to the park again. It's
Well, Mike Burke was an interesting character. He ran the team for CBS. He didn't know the team himself. But he softened up the image. I mean, the Yankees had always been the arrogant, win every year, do it the Yankee way or take the highway. And Mike Burke humanized the club a lot. And unfortunately, the teams weren't very good in those years, and the Mets had just caught fire and won the '69 World Championship. But Mike Burke ultimately arranged the sale of the club from CBS to George Steinbrenner, and the original sale, Steinbrenner and Burke were partners, something long forgotten.
Right.
But he was good at the time he was there. Unfortunately, the team wasn't very good.
And George, now you had spent a lot of time with George, and I was thinking about this, driving here today. For those of us that only watched him or heard him speak or read about him, if you had to characterize him, was he a hero, a villain, a saint, a knave, all of the above? Did he get fair press and publicity? What was George like, and what was his impact on your life and your career?
Well, he was a very complicated guy, and when he first bought the team, nobody in sports had really heard of him. And I, as a PR guy, I didn't fully appreciate this national celebrity that he was going to become. Portrayed on the Seinfeld show, hosting Saturday Night Live, and things like that. We just thought he was a tough and demanding boss, and he certainly wasn't easy to work for. But ultimately, when he passed away, you had to sort of keep score, and you'd say, well, the players are going to miss him because he pays them so well and surrounds them with great teammates. And the fans will miss him because he always put a great product on the field. They didn't always win the World Series, but they were always entertaining.
You competed.
Big star players. And the media was going to miss him because he was always a great copy, great, to pursue for his quotes on what was happening in the world. Other teams missed him because when the Yankees came to town, they'd fill up their ballparks. So those few of us in the front office who had a tough boss, what did it really matter? We were few in number, and the man's ultimate record with all the World Series he went into was fabulous.
It really is something, because he did take the Yankee dynasty and more or less put it back in place. And really, it's interesting because my new friend and your friend Roy Berger, whom we've spoken to, was in the interview previous to ours, was talking about Bill Verdon, who really was this odd duck kind of Yankee manager who was there, not even managing in Yankee Stadium. And it seemed that once everything moved back to the rebuilt stadium, Verdon, who is a great baseball man, was out and Billy was in. And I guess George, and that's another thing. You talk about Romeo and Juliet in baseball, this whole thing between George and Billy. I imagine through it all there was this great respect and this admiration and perhaps a love, or I've got to protect him from himself, even though they probably, I could only imagine what you witnessed through the years. And can you tell us about that?
Well, everything changed with the return of Billy Martin, who had sort of been exiled as a player in 1957 and lived his whole life desperately hoping to come back. Now you had different management, different owner, and the time was right for him to come back. And he was George Steinbrenner's kind of manager. He was exciting. He was a manager who could put fans in the ballpark. Bill Verdon was not that sort. I remember as the PR guy that Mr. Steinbrenner used to complain that Dick Hauser brought the lineup cards out to home plate at the start of the game. And Whitey Ford, who was the pitching coach, went to the mound to confer with the pitchers or make pitching changes, and fans never saw Bill Verdon. Now, I'm not sure how exciting that would have been to have seen him, but it was something he knew. He wanted a manager who was just a greater presence, and Billy Martin filled that for him 5 times.
And Billy to me is just this fascinating figure. He was so many things you could say about him. He was a battler. He was a humble guy, a guy that planted the seeds of his own undoing, a guy when he was on, and I've been very fortunate to speak with several of his former players, and the recently deceased Gates Brown said, out of all the Tiger managers, Billy was a winner. He knew how to win. He was serious about baseball. And then there were times when, I can remember one time we came down in the early 80s, he was managing Oakland. This is about when he had lost the club. And Marty, it didn't even look like he was even watching the game. It looked like he was somewhere else thinking about something else. And he was such you never really quite knew how you felt about him. But I mean, my managerial moment with Billy was spotting the pine tar on George Brett's bat. And I thought, wow, this is a guy who, if only he could be this way every single day, he would be, he'd be greater than John McGraw. And what was the front office sentiment about Billy?
It was that there was no better manager in baseball during the game, while the game was in progress. In the dugout, from the first pitch to the end of the game, he was terrific. But boy, was he complicated outside of those hours. And even though it feels kind of recent, we didn't have a full appreciation for the effects of alcoholism and treating it as an illness and a disease. And Billy was an alcoholic, and that manifested itself in changing his personality many times a day in many ways. I think today we have a greater understanding of all of that, and maybe there'd be some treatment, and maybe there'd be a different Billy Martin.
Yeah, he really was just, and he'd always say, I'm not the greatest Yankee, but I certainly am the proudest. And just to put on those pinstripes meant an incredible amount of belonging and validation to him. Now, when you were with the Yankees, the '76 series, and it was kind of a whitewashing by the Cincinnati Reds, and Thurman Munson, who's a gentleman, who's just a legend to so many Yankee fans. Most of the people today coming to the park weren't even born when Thurman was playing, but Thurman really was that gritty blue-collar Yankee who gave it everything he had, and kind of was just endeared so much of us to the game of baseball. The arrival of Reggie Jackson in 1977 Was this something that Thurman, at least in the beginning, or perhaps maybe not even in the beginning, but right through, had really wanted to see? Did he really feel that Reggie would bring the club into contention?
He did. He advocated, get the big guy, was his words.
Mm-hmm.
In '76, the Yankees cleanup hitter was the very capable Chris Chambliss, but Chris Chambliss was not a 40 home run guy.
No.
He was like a 15 to 20 home run guy. And he would be, and Thurman wanted a cleanup hitter hitting behind him who was that kind of a home run threat. So after the Yankees got swept by Cincinnati in the '76 World Series, there was a feeling that they really needed a cleanup hitter, and it was the first year of free agency, and in Thurman's words, let's go get the big guy. Then, as people who follow Yankee history know, Reggie came to spring training, did a magazine interview, and said, "I'm the straw that stirs the drink. Thurman can only stir it bad." He just alienated his whole team, because Thurman was their guy. He was the captain. He was very popular, and Reggie all of a sudden did this ridiculous interview, which he denies doing. I have to, or out of context, give him his due. He's on record as saying that. But that's what appeared in the magazine, and it just created a horrible environment for Reggie for that whole year. But he hits 3 home runs in the last game of the World Series, and the Yankees win their first World Championship since 1962. So it's Shakespearean, but that's what happened.
Yeah, and I was one of the, shall we say, the many watching the game of the week with the whole Reggie and Billy episode in Boston, and taking Reggie out of the game, and the pushing and shoving in the dugout, and Yogi Berra, at whatever age he was, just separating the two of them with those claw barrel-like hands. It was an amazing thing, and I can only imagine that Monday morning going into the office. Man, you guys must have had a lot happening.
Baseball was becoming really big time by the late '70s, and Reggie had something to do with it. He was a guy that got attention. When I joined the Yankees in the late '60s, baseball was going through a tough time, not only with college-age students, but with America. Football and basketball had really caught on. Arguably, football had become the national pastime. And you could really say that in the late '60s, Reggie Jackson, Johnny Bench, and Tom Seaver were the only superstars that the game produced. So now, fast forward 10 years, and Reggie wins a World Series for the Yankees. The World Championship flag is back over Yankee Stadium, and suddenly all is right with the world, and we go into an era of enormous popularity for baseball.
And it's, and it really was an era that, at least, being in Stamford, Connecticut, and actually in my early 20s back then, it was the whole interest of, yes, the Yankees are back, and I hadn't seen that. I was a little bit young for the Mantle and Maris era. I do remember the end of it, but it really started to take on national prominence. And I know you had spent some time, or a good deal of time, in the commissioner's office and with WPIX, and I was thinking the other day, and Mark, my producer, whom you've spoken to, I mentioned the commissionership of Bowie Kuhn, and again, how many people today even know who Bowie Kuhn is? And depending on what side of the coin you come on, he was either the man who revolutionized baseball, or perhaps put in changes, or was around for changes that everyone regrets. And one of the things we were talking about earlier was Bowie was a great believer in the integrity of the game. And there was a time, and this is almost unbelievable, and I'm sure you remember it much more than I might, when Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays were working as greeters, or considered working as greeters, in the newly formed Atlantic City casinos, and Bowie said, well, if you do that, you have to make a choice of being in baseball. And today, we're in this world where, well, now we have fantasy sports, and, gambling, if it were, has almost taken on a, shall we say, sort of put on a white tie and tails, and it's just kind of marching along with anything else. But Bowie had that, he had these very sort of, at least in my recollection, shall we say, sort of Chinese wall definitions of baseball shall remain pure. And just an incredibly intelligent, complex, perhaps controversial guy. I do understand that he and Howard Cosell had a long, contentious relationship, but they later became friends. How do you describe Bowie Kuhn if someone comes up? So what'd you think about him, Marty?
Well, it's an interesting question because it happens that I was his biographer. I worked with him on his memoir, a book called Hardball, which came out in, I think, 1987.
Yes, I read it.
Yeah, he lost most of the arbitrations. Marvin Miller won almost everything involving labor that came along in those days. So history kind of shows that he was on the wrong side of history because things like free agency were inevitable. They were going to happen at some point. And you could say it's been great for the game because look at the revenues that have flowed since then. So Marvin Miller looks terrific historically, Bowie Kuhn not so much. But you have to remember the commissioner works for the owners. The owners did not want to push free agency, and Kuhn was the guy who they charged with the responsibility of getting it off. So he didn't succeed by a very narrow margin. You know, the single arbitrator ruled that there would be free agency. It's turned out to be a pretty good thing for baseball. But Kuhn probably gets maligned somewhat unfairly, although, to digress just for a moment, I kind of agree with you on the Mandolin Mays thing with the casinos. I don't think that was the correct call, and I think playing golf with people there is not was not putting them in touch with the
Commiseration with known gamblers.
But anyway, that's my take on Bowie Kuhn.
It's, and it brings to mind, and I love your book, Pinstripe Empire, talking about the narrative history of the New York Yankees and all of the little nuancy things, and perhaps a little before my time, but when you happen to go to YouTube or if you see it on television, you pull up a old image of Yankee Stadium and the old scoreboard and those very prominent letters saying no betting. And when I was working at a college here up the road many years ago, a then elderly college professor, I walked into the office one day to teach an afternoon class, and I had a transistor radio. I was listening to the 1986 baseball playoffs, and he said, "Are you familiar with the custom of betting on the pitch?" I said, no, Professor Trinkus, I'm not. He said, well, what we used to do in college in the 30s was we'd go to the radio and we would actually bet on the outcome of pitches. $5, it will be a curveball. Okay, you're on. Bang. Double or nothing, he grounds out to first base. Okay, you're on. And I would imagine, and perhaps you have some knowledge of this, that there was a lot of, shall we say, serial betting going on in Yankee Stadium on just the outcome of whatever was taking place in the next play in the 1930s. And that's why the sign went up.
It was always something baseball was super sensitive to after the Black Sox scandal in the 1919 World Series, and why Babe Ruth was so important because he diverted attention away from what almost took baseball down, this gambling scandal.
Sure.
It's so important that baseball stay above the fray and totally clean on that subject that it is, a little suspicious to me as to how they could take advertising today from the state lotteries and things like that. But they do try hard to stay away from lotteries that involve, the outcome of baseball games. So that's sort of a fine line they've now accepted.
And it's Yankee trivia to me, or actually, shall we call it Yankee ephemera / trivia, is absolutely fascinating. And in pouring through the book, the whole building of the, shall we say, the original of original Yankee stadiums to me was, it was almost, I don't want to call it an ignominious beginning, but it actually was a very odd beginning considering the empire that was to follow. And can you tell our viewers and listeners about that?
One of the things I came upon that was of interest to me with the construction of the original stadium, we always took a lot of pride in calling it the first triple-deck stadium
Right.
in America, which it kind of was. But it turned out there was a zoning ordinance that forbade a triple-deck structure for architectural reasons, for construction reasons, and safety. So the Yankees at the time, in the 1920s, insisted that no, it's double-deck stadium and there's a little mezzanine tucked in between the two decks. It's not really triple-deck.
Ah.
I thought that was kind of an interesting discovery.
Now, the original Yankee Stadium, I guess my first game that I actually remember going, I think, was 1967. I was familiar with the stadium. I had seen it on TV before then. It sort of had a UV configuration, not totally unlike the one today, but the ends were closed-in. The bleachers were high-backed, straight across. And from what I understand, all of that didn't happen on day one. That happened over time.
Originally, it was going to be triple-decked or double-decked with a mezzanine around the entire field. The bleachers would become a triple-deck structure. They opened in 1923. Later in that decade, they extended the left field grandstand towards the foul pole, and in the 30s, they did it in right field, again, past the foul pole and out towards what you remember as the bullpen.
Right.
So it was sort of ever evolving, but especially by winning all those championships when Murderers Row was there in the 20s, it immediately took on a historical significance as this is what says baseball is important in America today, this ballpark.
And, they might want to cart me away as being a nut, but I tell people that there was a time in Yankee Stadium at the end of the game you can actually walk out on the field and walk out through the bleachers.
Oh, yeah.
Please tell everyone that happened.
People were better behaved. You could do it from the time it opened in 23 until, I would say, the early 60s, maybe around 62, 63. And they let people walk off, not on the infield dirt, but across the outfield grass and exit through right onto River Avenue, now called Rivera Avenue.
Right.
Under the bleachers and out through the center field gates. It was an amazing sight to see. One of the reasons I think that they got away from it was with the rise of Mickey Mantle's popularity, there became an issue of security involving Mickey getting off the field from center field to the dugout, and that kind of led to nobody exiting off across the grass.
And I know my Stamford, Connecticut friends would not forgive me if we didn't chat about the Mick for a while, and this is a man you were blessed to spend a lot of time with, and he, his personage was the, as he said, the shuckin', head-ducking, grinning country boy, and the tragic hero playing through injuries and the bandaging before the games, and someone when he was on the field who gave it everything that he had. He played as well as he could, as injured as he may be. And how did the Mick perceive his fame? Did he like it? Was he bothered by it? Was he the sort of guy that would kind of like to go off and be by himself, and he never really got the shall we say, the opportunity because he was Mickey Mantle? To me, he's almost sort of like a Billy Martin, but perhaps even more so in the complexities.
Well, he never cared about the celebrity. He liked to hang out with his teammates, whether they were famous or not so famous. When he came up, Joe DiMaggio did not respect him that much. Kind of the way baseball was done in those days was that the veterans resented the rookies because they were taking the jobs of their friends, of their teammates. So DiMaggio hardly had the time of day for Mickey Mantle, and Mickey never forgot that. And as he grew and matured and became the senior member of the team, he would be great with any kid that came along. And I witnessed many times where we get somebody, a September call-up, show up in the dugout, stay in the clubhouse, and Mickey Mantle would walk across the clubhouse and shake the guy's hand and just say, "Hi, I'm Mick." You can imagine the reaction by this rookie who would have been afraid to go over to Mickey Mantle. Saw it in spring training all the time. Kids who weren't even going to make the team, but spring training, you have a lot of players there. They'd come to me as the PR guy and they'd say, I don't think I'm making the club. Do you think you could arrange for me to get photographed with Mickey Mantle where I could, have a copy of that picture? And Mick was always, sure, let's do it. So that was part of my spring training routine.
It's fascinating, and I. It's amazing, and I don't think that there is a, be you Yankee fan or not, I don't think that there's as much tragic comedy, psycho, humor, whatever you want to call it, complexity in the characters of the great Yankees than there is in any other ball club. To me, it's fascinating. It's almost like, Greek mythology. In our remaining moments, and this is sort of an off-the-wall question, but I'm going to ask you that. You've been a New Yorker all your life. You've worked with the Yankees. You've worked in baseball. You've worked with WPIX. If you had to choose all the mayors, going back to, say, Robert Wagner to the present day, and I were to ask you, Marty, who was the best New York City mayor from a public relations standpoint, who did the most projecting the good image of the city, who might you say?
Oh gosh, what a question. Totally off the wall. You know what? Ed Koch was a real New Yorker, and he had a great way with people, and, it's politics. Not everybody loved the guy. But I think he was great for New York, and he was just like a man of the people, and he came to represent a scrappy city that was doing its best, sometimes in hard times. I didn't give the answer a lot of thought, but I'm going to go with Ed Koch.
And interestingly, he wasn't a baseball guy, was he? He wasn't really...
He couldn't care less, didn't know the rules, and Giuliani was the biggest fan. But I go with Ed Koch on your question.
And thank you so much for answering that. And Marty, it's been a blast. We're out of time, and I'm honored to speak with you today. And thank you for spending some time with us. And we will continue to keep in touch. Tell us where you're at these days and what your projects are, so this way we can get it out to our friends and fans.
Yeah, thank you. I can be reached at through my website, which is Appel, APPELPR.com, and just at the website redesign. It's got all my books in there, as well as magazine articles I've written. So baseball fans might enjoy visiting the website, and it's very nice of you to have me on. I enjoy talking with you.
And the same here. Thanks so much, and continued success through the day and through the year. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Bye now.
And that was the legendary Marty Appel, and we're totally honored to have him here today. Do not go away. We have great performances yet to come. Next up, Major League Baseball's worst enemy. Shh! You can get into a baseball game affordably. And we're going to tell you how to do that. And just he's adding to his body of knowledge as we speak. Kurt Smith will be with us right after this. Tony DeAngelo here in Connecticut Morning. We're at the halfway point. See you in just a bit.